I call the member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I present the Safety, Rehabilitation and Compensation Amendment Fair Protection for Firefighters Bill 2011 and the explanatory memorandum. Madam Deputy Speaker, every day in Australia, firefighters, including those who are here with us in the gallery today, put their health on the line to serve the community. They put themselves in danger to regularly protect individuals, families, towns and cities from the threat of fire, and sometimes they pay the ultimate price in doing so. And all members of the public have a deep respect for that service that firefighters perform on our behalf, as the immediate risks are very obvious and apparent for all to see. But the longer-term risks are often not quite so apparent and obvious, but they are nonetheless just as dangerous. And I hope that this bill will go some small way to remedying those very significant and real risks. Mr Deputy Speaker, there is no longer any debate about whether firefighting increases the risk of cancer. Numerous studies, predominantly in the US, but also in Canada, New Zealand and the United Kingdom, have demonstrated very clear links between cancer and firefighting. And the largest of these, the LeMaster study in 2007 in Ohio, was conducted over 15 years and looked at dozens of fire departments and over 110,000 firefighters. Though generally recruited from the healthiest and fittest amongst us, studies have shown time and time again that firefighters exposed to many structural fires, rather than just a single fire, will have a clear increase in the risk of contracting cancer. For example, Mr Deputy Speaker, firefighters start out being 20% healthier than the average member of the public, but after 5 years, the average firefighter will have twice the risk of contracting leukemia, and after several years in the job, male firefighters can find themselves up to 10 times more likely of contracting testicular cancer. And despite the best protective clothing and advances in technology and protective gear, firefighters in plastics fires will continue to be exposed to high level of toxic carcinogens absorbed through the skin, and the associated increased risk of contracting cancer will remain the grisly reality. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are around 70,000 synthetic chemicals in the average home, and when they burn, they produce a cancer-causing cocktail. And no matter how good a firefighter's breathing apparatus is, their uniform must be able to breathe, and many firefighters will tell you of coming back from a fire, in fact sometimes even days after a fire, and finding that the black, thick, cancer-producing smoke has found its way through their gear and into their open pores and into their skin. And other jurisdictions have acknowledged this. The overwhelming majority of states in the United States of America and Canada have dealt with this issue, specifically by introducing legislation to create the same presumption that my bill will create, that the occupation of firefighting is the dominant cause of the contraction of the particular cancer. And in doing so, those states have made it easier for large numbers of firefighters to access workers' compensation as a result. The last decade in particular has seen the legislation sweep from state to state in Canada, and the experience of firefighters and legislators alike in implementing so-called presumptive legislation across the country has been a very positive one. The bill makes a very simple amendment to the Safety, Rehabilitation and Compensation Act 1988. It makes a small addition to Part 1 of the Act that will, if passed by the Parliament, provide that if a firefighter has been employed for a certain period before being diagnosed with one of 7 types of cancer, the employment will be taken to have been the dominant cause of the contraction of that cancer unless the contrary is established. The cancers are those that have been identified by the relevant studies as being the highest risk to firefighters. These are most often those cancers of the areas that are the filters of the body. The bill identifies 7 key cancers that have been shown to have these clear links: brain, bladder, kidney, breast and testicular cancers, as well as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and leukemia, and leaves open the option of the Minister adding to the list by regulation, based inevitably, of course, on wider scientific justification. These provisions will be restricted to those firefighters that have been actively involved in firefighting duties proper, and require firefighters to have served for a minimum number of years before being diagnosed with the relevant primary site cancer. The qualifying periods are different for each cancer and are justified again on the best studies available. Mr Deputy Speaker, I do have another 5 minutes, but I would like, with your indulgence and with the leave of the House, to now hand over to 2 other members from different political parties. I think it is tribute to the lobbying work that is being done by the firefighters, many of whom are here today, that this is being approached in a non-partisan political way, and it is my hope that this bill proceeds through this place and ultimately through the Senate with the support of all political parties.
Is leave granted for the member for Caldwell? I understand this, which is the House to grant leave. The member for Caldwell has this call.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I welcome the opportunity to speak on the Safety, Rehabilitation and Compensation Amendment Fair Protection for Firefighters Bill 2011, and I'm very pleased to join both the member for Melbourne and the member for Macmillan in jointly sponsoring this bill. Deputy Speaker, I recently spoke in Parliament at greater length about the need to introduce presumptive legislation for Australian firefighters. So today, I simply want to reiterate my support for this very important issue and make the point that while we all very often acknowledge the life-saving work of our firefighters in this place, and we've done it on many occasions, we also need to acknowledge the human cost that their profession bears on their health and well-being, as well as the cost to their families. Deputy Speaker, presumptive legislation is a legislative instrument which stipulates the health risks that are directly associated with the firefighting profession by identifying diseases or conditions that have been shown to be hazards associated with an occupation. Presumptive legislation is not, of course, without precedents. Presumptive legislation now exists, as the member for Melbourne has already said, in 7 Canadian provinces and some 43 US states. And, of course, legislation is now also being considered in Europe. It is therefore time, Deputy Speaker, for this Parliament to get the ball rolling on this issue, and we do so today, Deputy Speaker, through the introduction of this private member's bill. Scientific evidence through international studies have shown that there is a visibly higher rate of cancer-related illnesses amongst firefighters than there is in amongst the general population. And again, because the member for Melbourne has so comprehensively referred to the LeMaster study, which forms the basis of international studies, I won't make any further reference to it. I simply want to make the point that the conditions identified within this bill are not an exhaustive list of diseases, but rather an evidence-based list of those diseases which have been identified to have a direct link with the firefighting profession. The bill identifies the main cancer-related illnesses that have disproportionate rates of incidence amongst firefighters when compared with the general population, and that's a very important point to make, Deputy Speaker. So this is an important and timely bill relating to a very important profession, and I'm very pleased to be part of a process that brings this issue to the attention of the House. And in doing so, I also want to acknowledge the many firefighters that are in the gallery here today, keeping a very close eye on the progress of this bill. Thank you.
I understand that the House to grant leave to the member for Macmillan to speak in the bill. Leave is granted. I call the member for Macmillan.
Deputy Speaker, I was asked this morning on Gippsland Radio why I was cuddling up to Adam Bandt on this particular issue. Now, although Adam's not quite my style, Maria is more like my style, I've got to say to you that my answer was this. The answer was this is not about Adam Bandt or Russell Broadbent or Maria Van Bakenyu or even Senator Gavin Marshall, who has been very helpful in this regard. It's actually about firefighters, their families and their future. It's not about us, it's not even about the Parliament. But where the Parliament's important is the process of the Parliament, which the member for Caldwell has just referred to. What the proposal here, and I commend the member for Melbourne and the member for Caldwell and Senator Gavin Marshall for their support in this. And whilst I'm doing that, I want to commend all the firefighters that have gone before us. Recently, we celebrated 100 years of the Firefighters Union in Victoria, a very important occasion where we actually honoured those people that have gone before us and made the way. But in this particular case, this is about firefighters, their future and what they do for us, and this Parliament rising above all other concerns to address the issue that is faced by a very specialised group in our community. And if we can come on board with what has happened internationally, and we can support these people in their endeavours, it's up to us as a Parliament to go through those processes, investigate and bring this legislation forward for their benefit. I am very, very proud to associate myself with these members and with the members of the with firefighters right across Australia. As a 12-year volunteer firefighter, I can't even identify what it's like to face the issues they face every day of their working lives. I wish you all the best, and I hope this bill is progressed.
I call the member.